You don't need your fears anymore. Jesus Christ can take the stumbling stone of fear and turn it into a stepping stone of faith. His personal word to us is, "Have no fear. I'm with you always." The new movie, No Longer Alone, is the remarkable story, a dramatic true life story of the conquest of fear and the conversion of Joan Windmill. Joan is now a member of our congregation, and I've asked her to read the scripture, John 6:15 to 21. Joan?
These words of Jesus have meant so much to me in my life when I was fearful. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain, himself alone. And when even was now come, his disciples went down unto the sea, and entered into a ship, and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them, and the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. So when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, they see Jesus walking on the sea, and drawing nigh unto the ship, and they were afraid. But he saith unto them, "It is I, be not afraid." Then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went.
The woman was put together. She was beautifully coiffured, magnificently dressed, confident, adequate in every way. She was a dynamic executive in a local office firm. No one would have known that deep inside of this woman raged a volcano of fear. Now, some of her fears were imagined, others of them were very real. None of them seemed to have been touched by her faith in Jesus Christ as her Lord. When she came to me, she described the fact that though she tried to get rid of her fears, she was still afraid, and she'd give them away to God one day and clutch them back the next day. And then she said a remarkable thing. "You know, I try and get rid of my fears, I tell God about them, and then I pull them back because I have found it more comfortable to be afraid than to be free." Can you imagine that? She said, "How long am I going to have to be this way?" And I said to her, "As long as you want to." Well, of course, she was shocked. She said, "What do you mean? Do you mean I have a choice?" And I said, "Oh, yes. Though you believe in Jesus Christ, you are coddling fear. You are clutching it to yourself, holding on to it, because it's more secure than being without it." And then we talked about the capacity to think clearly about our faith, to review what God has done for us, to think deeply about the cross, his forgiveness, his power with us, the hope that is ours. And then the fact that those thoughts send nerve energy down into our emotions. And then with the power of will, we can do what the Lord has told us to do. And yet this woman was crippled because inside she found that the feeling of fear was more satisfying than the feeling of faith. We prayed together. She turned her life over to Jesus Christ and asked him to minister at the jugular vein of her fear. Way down inside this woman, there were experiences that she had never resolved. And it was those inner sore and aching nerves that were causing the problem of fear. There were some clandestine areas in her life, some places where she was hiding, like all of us. And because of that, a pervading sense of dread and panic was inside of her. And that was the reason for all her little fears. She left that day, but I knew she'd be back. And when she came back, she said something that still rings inside of me. She said, "Who needs it?" And I said, "What?" And her response was, "I don't need my fears anymore." Now, what happened to that woman can happen to you and to me. We all know fear. What's yours? I know mine. We all have fears that begin to grow the minute we're alive. We come into the world with the fear of loud noises. As we grow, we fear the darkness and falling. We're barely into our teens before we begin to be loaded up with the infection of fear that's epidemic in most families and certainly all over our society. We fear people, what they might do, the eventualities of failures and inadequacies. Because of the inner scar inside of us, many of us are afraid of finances. A woman said to me the other day, "Why is it that every time my husband and I talk about money, we argue? We're about to get a divorce every time we go over the budget." Anybody else have that problem? And she said a remarkable thing. She said, when both of us were young, we were poor. My husband has taken out that poverty by saving everything he can get his old money bag's hand onto. I'm just the opposite. She said, because I was poor, I want to spend everything the minute I get it. And they argued all of the time about money. Many of us find that people remind us of someone else. Do you have that experience? Where someone reappears in your life and suddenly you have all of the feelings and reactions to someone else who looked like that person? A parent, someone who hurt us, a lover who rejected or whom we rejected, some teacher who didn't give us affirmation, a significant other who never made us feel significant. Remember how that was? And we're filled with fear when a new person reappears into our life. Some of us are afraid of loving. Others of us are afraid of being loved. Some of us are afraid of being with people and others afraid of being alone. Some of us are frightened about the past that someone will know. Others of us are frightened about the present, that it won't be all that we want it to be. Others of us are afraid of the future, that our dreams will be eclipsed. Now, all of God's creatures have a lot in common. They all know peril. And suddenly, the inner glands react with a spurt of the juices of energy. We can either fight or fly away, either know victory or defeat. But there's only one thing different about a human being, about you and me, and that is the capacity of imagination. And that's the problem. It's the imagined fears of our life that make us so disturbed and troubled. It happened to me the other day. At sundown, as it was getting dusk, up in the Hollywood Hills, a police helicopter spun around the Hollywood Reservoir near where we live. Piercing lights went down into the bushes and into the forest. We saw a fugitive running up a path. And we thought, did they get him? Is he going to come into our backyard? And later that night, we heard some noises. I said, he's here. And so we turned out all the lights. And I went around, opened the curtains, and I peered through. And there was a nice little family of raccoons looking with white faces up at us. Imagined fear. But we're in good company. The disciples were afraid on the Sea of Galilee. You know, that little sea is like a bowl of water, a shallow bowl. The mountains are around it, and between the gorges of the mountain, it's like a tunneled wind that has concentrated blasts right down on the sea. Turbulent, violent storms are a normal thing. The disciples had been ordered by Jesus to cross the sea, and they were afraid. And though they had rowed for hours, they had made little progress. The scripture tells us that it was about 3 or 4 in the morning, the fourth watch, and they had only gone 3 or 4 miles. We can imagine that they were rowing and afraid. But something else was turbulent inside of these disciples of Jesus. Something was wrong with their relationship with Jesus. The crowd had tried to make him a king, and they wanted to join with them and rise to power with him, and he had ordered them across the sea, and he dismissed the crowd. But at the third watch, the rowing became more impossible. And then by the fourth watch, they couldn't move. And it was then that Jesus came to them. And the one who had brooded over the water and created the world made that sea with all of its white caps and all of its sudsing foam into an asphalt base. And he walked to the disciples and said, "I am. Have no fear." The real translation is, Yahweh, have no fear. Ego eimi, have no fear. I am here, have no fear. And then they invited him into the boat, and he got them to shore. And then the disciples knew that Jesus was who he had claimed he was. Now, Jesus Christ, the same living Lord, the God who made us, who comes to claim us, can conquer our fear. And this is how he does it. Step 1, describe the fear. Write it out. Make it so clear that you can't miss it. And then tell him about it. Tell him, "Lord, right now I'm in panic because of this." Secondly, step 2, dissect it. Be very sure whether it's an imagined fear or a real fear. And then once you have clarified that, go down deeper to know what it is inside that's causing that fear. Thirdly, disown it. Get rid of it. It isn't yours anymore. Jesus Christ died and was raised up that you could be free of that fear once and for all. Now, when we claim that, we're ready to discover step 4, the displacement theory. The very one who recorded this event in his gospel also said something to the early church, which is the secret of overcoming fear. He said this: there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. Fear has to do with punishment. And he who fears is not perfected in love. The word perfected and perfect means accomplishing a purpose, the Greek word teleos. In other words, God made us for his love, so that if we experienced it, it could displace the fear deep down inside of us. Fear is really the experience of not feeling loved. But once we know his love, which accepts us at the core of our being, then the very cause of the fear is healed at in-depth level. But that's not all. More than that, we can dare to face our fears daily. Emerson said, "He is not mature who does not face a new fear every day." I believe it. Remember, the disciples invited Jesus into the boat. Who wouldn't? If you were on the sea, I want him in that boat with me. But notice this. It isn't that fear is suddenly banished forever and ever. It's that we discover how to face it, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute, if you're anything like me. With Jesus in the boat, we can make it to the shore, and we can make it on to the next steps of the strategy of God. Now, every one of us has the experience of someone, something, a dread tracking us. Remember those words from the ancient mariner? It's true of so many of us. Like one who walks a lonesome road, doth walk in dread and fear, and having once turned round, moves on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. But with Jesus Christ, we can turn around and look that fiend in the face and say, Jesus Christ defeated you 2,000 years ago on a hill outside of Jerusalem, and I'm not going to be afraid of you any longer. You know, the old ditty about a trouble's a ton, a trouble's an ounce, could also be said about fear. A fear's a ton, a fear's an ounce, a fear is what you make it. It isn't the fact that you fear that counts, it's only how you take it. And I want you to know the only way to take it is to let Jesus Christ take it. Cyrano de Bergerac said, when he looked at his enemy, "What? What odds? Only 100 to 1. And we can say, what? What odds? Only 100 to 2. Jesus and you. I don't need my fears anymore. What about you?